Welcome to First Delivery of Conduct and Mark Assessments. This has the embedded unit standard 4098. This course provides students the opportunity to learn about use of appropriate assessments, following guidelines for conducting and marking assessments, providing useful and positive feedback to learners. It is also about reviewing own performance to ensure best practice in conducting assessments. The purpose of the assignment is to assess completion, delivery and marking of learners' assessments according to regulations, procedures, and guidelines. This covers basic assessment procedures. People credited with this unit standard are able to prepare for and conduct assessment, complete assessment administration, and review the assessment practice. It leads to next microcredential, which takes an in-depth look at assessment design and moderation. However, because it is a micro-credential, I have given a heap of additional resources to add to your assessment practice. I am the course writer for the course and been asked to deliver the program. Some of you have introduced yourselves, so if you can ensure that you have on the class discussion page, so that I can learn all your names. This is not a class, it's a collaboration. We all have ideas to bring to the table. This course has 3 specific components. Identifying our stakeholder, who are they? Preparing assessment and conditions for the assessment. Preparing our candidates for success against regulatory requirements. Conduct our assessments. Making judgments. Post-assessment procedures. Reflective practice. It's an evidence-based course and assessment which relies on the consistent collection of evidence through the course. By now you would have looked at the orientation and outline. Let's look at the 4 main learning outcomes together and then assessments. Learning Outcome 1. Prepare for assessment. Assessment materials are selected in consultation with all relevant stakeholders. Pre-assessment moderation requirements are identified and met. All relevant stakeholders are informed of the assessment arrangements. The range may include, but is not limited to, sequence of events, assessment, methodology, reassessment, appeal procedure, location, time. The environment and/or context in which the assessment is to occur is prepared. The range may include, but is not limited to, candidate special needs, health and safety considerations, assessment conditions. Learner Outcome 2. Conduct assessment. Assessment matches the selected assessment materials and agreed assessment arrangements. Any modifications are agreed with relevant stakeholders. Assessment judgments are based on evidence that is valid, authentic, current, and sufficient, and are consistent with judgments made on similar evidence. The feedback is timely, direct, and is confined to strengths and weaknesses in performance and/or requirements for further evidence. Learner Outcome 3. Complete assessment administration. Assessment results are recorded in accordance with all relevant stakeholder requirements. Post-assessment moderation requirements are described and met. Learner Outcome 4. Review the assessment practice. Review of assessment practice includes identification of possible areas for future refinement, feedback from stakeholders, and self-review. As you can see, there are 3 distinct areas to the course. Assessment preparation. In accordance with stakeholder requirements. This means our own organization, government bodies, NZQA and WDCs, legislation, etc. Part 1. Preparation of the assessment moderation, checking that it's for purpose, as well as candidate and environment preparation. Part 2. Conducting and marking the assessment under observation, making judgments and delivering strengths-based feedback. Part 3. Post-assessments procedures, reporting, post-moderation, and reflective practice. It's an evidence-based course and assessment which relies on the consistent collection of evidence through the course, so it is important to stay on top of the workload. This class will take on a flipped model, which means you are required to go through most of the resources and activities at your own pace, and we will use class time to go over important aspects of the work, assessments, and evidence required. Thanks for listening to me, and let's now take a look at the assessments. Glossary of terms for assessor training. Some of the terms we will be using through this course. Accreditation. The status awarded to an education provider under the Education and Training Act 2020. Achievement, achieved. When a student meets the requirements of a standard at a satisfactory level. Assessment, the process of collecting and evaluating evidence to establish the level of an individual's performance. Assessment criteria, standards against which the performance of an element or outcome is assessed. Assessment method, specific strategies used to gather evidence of achievement. Assessment standard, standards such as unit standards and achievement standards listed on the Directory of Assessment Standards. Assessor, a person responsible for evaluating the assessment evidence presented by learners. Candidate, a person undergoing an assessment. Community of practice, a group of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. Competency, describes the behavior needed to effectively perform tasks and roles. A competent individual can consistently carry out required tasks. Consent to assess, certification given to education organizations under Section 449 of the Education and Training Act 2020. Consistency, in assessment, consistency means making similar judgments under similar circumstances, ensuring reliability across assessors. Credit value, assigned to unit standards and qualifications, reflecting the expected time a learner needs to spend on learning, practice, and assessment. Directory of Assessment Standards, lists all quality-assured unit and achievement standards. Evidence, information collected to demonstrate achievement against standards. Evidence range requirements. Evidence requirements outline the specific criteria and conditions under which evidence should be gathered and assessed to demonstrate a candidate's achievement of a particular standard. Fair assessment, assessment that avoids biases unrelated to the assessment criteria, ensuring impartiality and fairness. Flipped classroom, a flipped classroom is structured around the idea that lecture or direct instruction is not the best use of class time. Instead, students encounter information before class, freeing class time for activities that involve higher-order thinking. ITO. ITO stands for Industry Training Organisation. It is an entity in New Zealand responsible for setting standards, coordinating training, and supporting skill development within specific industries to meet workforce needs. Knowledge, the information and understanding required to perform tasks. Learner, a person engaged in learning and/or assessment. Legislation, legislation refers to laws, statutes, or regulations enacted by a governing body, legal rights, responsibilities. Marking guide, marking guide is a structured document outlining assessment criteria and performance expectations to ensure consistent and objective evaluation of student work. Moderation, a process ensuring that assessment decisions meet national standards, providing quality assurance. New Zealand Qualifications Framework, NZQF. Framework that sets out the levels and standards of qualifications in New Zealand. Observation. Observation, in the context of assessment or learning, refers to the act of watching and noting behaviors, actions, or performance of individuals to gather evidence of their knowledge, skills, or competences. Registered assessors. Assessors recommended by their employer, holding specific qualifications and meeting industry requirements. Holds Unit Standard 4098. Reflective practice. Self-assessment and critical analysis of one's own performance to improve future practice. Rubric. A rubric is a scoring tool that outlines specific criteria and levels of achievement used to evaluate performance or assess quality in various contexts, such as education, assessment, or professional evaluations. Self-assessment. Assessment conducted by the learner on their own performance. Skills. Practical abilities required to perform tasks effectively. Special assessment conditions, SAC. Accommodations provided to candidates with medical or learning disabilities to ensure fair assessment. Unit standard. A standard specifying the outcomes of learning and the criteria for assessment. Verification. Confirmation of assessment decisions by another assessor, ensuring consistency and reliability. Workforce Development Council. A Workforce Development Council, WDC, is a collaborative entity that addresses industry-specific workforce needs and development strategies. Stakeholders. What is a stakeholder? A stakeholder is any individual, group, or organization that is affected by or can affect the actions, decisions, policies, or goals of another entity, project, or organization. Stakeholders can include customers, learners, suppliers, shareholders, government agencies, community groups, and others with an interest or stake in the outcomes or operations of the entity in question. 1. Vocational education. There have been recent changes to vocational training in Aotearoa, New Zealand, including the establishment of workforce development councils and regional skills leadership groups. We will watch the video shortly from the Tertiary Education Commission regarding the reform of vocational education. The 6 WDCs govern the sectors of construction and infrastructure, services, creative technology and entertainment, community health, education and social services, manufacturing and engineering and people, food and fibre. Please refer to the notes on each WDC for further information. The New Zealand Qualifications Authority, NZQA. NZQA plays a vital role in maintaining and enhancing the quality and credibility of education and training in New Zealand, ensuring that qualifications are valuable and internationally recognised. NZQA oversees and assures the quality of education and training in New Zealand through managing qualifications, providing a framework, accrediting providers, and supporting assessment practices. According to the Education and Training Act, 2020, NZQA is the body primarily responsible for quality assurance matters in the tertiary education and vocational education and training sectors, apart from universities. If you are interested in knowing more about the process for approval and accreditation, you can go to the NZQA links I have provided in activities. Learner voice as a stakeholder. The learner voice, as a stakeholder in assessment, represents the perspectives and feedback of students within educational processes. It is essential for ensuring assessments are relevant, effective, and inclusive. By incorporating learner input, institutions can enhance the quality of education by addressing student needs, improving teaching methods, and fostering a more engaging and supportive learning environment. In education and training, we often talk about being learner-centered. But what does this actually mean? A learner-centered approach in assessment emphasizes placing the learner at the heart of the assessment process. Principles of a learner-centered approach include understanding learner goals and needs, collaborative assessment design, clear communication and expectations, flexible assessment methods, continuous feedback and reflection, supporting learner well-being, promoting self-regulation and ownership. Other stakeholders may include advisory groups, your managers, your organization's quality assurance department. Educational quality assurance refers to systematic processes and practices implemented by educational institutions or authorities to ensure that teaching, learning, and assessment meet established standards of excellence, consistency, and effectiveness. It involves monitoring, evaluating, and improving educational programs, services, and outcomes. Research your organization's quality assurance in relation to assessment. Collaborate with a colleague, supervisor, or quality management to find out what role the quality team play in the consultation process. Next week we will look at what is an assessment, who is involved in the assessment, what is a standard, assessment methodologies and frameworks, course requirements. Your flipped learning will include completing the prescribed reading, preparing for next week, by watching the video links and choosing your pre-moderated assessment, observer, candidate, and all supporting material for class next week. Let's recap the requirements. This course is about you being assessed on your ability to assess other people. This is what you will need to do if you haven't already. Identify the unit standards or industry standards or NZ certificates you will be assessing. Understand the training of candidates required and or learning materials used. Identify the assessment materials. Find one or two candidates to assess. Explain to candidate that their assessments will be used in your assignment. Identify an observer moderator who has 4098 or is an industry expert. Assessment requirements. These are the criteria you must meet. You are assessed on your ability to assess candidate S against two smaller unit standards, less than 10 credits each, or industry standards. You can use the 2 unit standards used must add to 4 or more credits each, or one larger unit standard of 10 credits or more. This option requires using 2 different assessment methods. Or industry standards. A specialized industry standard, e.g., nursing portfolio, or part of a New Zealand certificate, e.g., New Zealand certificate in hospitality.